This episode is sponsored by Realtor.com, who wants you to take advantage of your free profile on Realtor.com. By claiming and completing your free profile, adding a photo, and all of the information that puts you head and shoulders above the competition, you're on your way to receiving free leads, helping search engines find you, and staying top of mind with past clients. To learn more about claiming your free profile, go to Realtor.com/profile. Welcome to the Real View podcast, where Ohio Realtors connect you to innovators and influencers, keeping you with the real view of real estate. Whether you're a broker, agent, first-time homebuyer, industry leader, or just happen to stumble upon our podcast today, you can expect to hear tips, tools, tricks, interesting information, and so much more from the experts in Ohio's real estate game. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Real View podcast. I am your host, Allison Wiley. Joining me today, I am so happy to welcome onto the show our 2024 Ohio Realtors Convention keynote speaker, Jason Roberts. He is the founding director of The Better Block. He is an artist, civic activist, and urban designer whose life work has been dedicated to creating healthy, vibrant, and sustainable neighborhoods. And as I mentioned, he is going to be joining us on Tuesday, the 10th, to kick off really the beginning of our Ohio Realtors Convention and highlighting as our keynote speaker for this year's event. Jason, welcome onto the show.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and he's going to dive into his world. I'll share with you all a little bit about what he does, and we'll get a really in-depth presentation during his keynote in September. But we thought it would be a great idea just to have him on as a little preview so you guys can get a good taste and feel as to who he is, what he's going to be talking to us about, and learning a little bit more about you, Jason. So I think we should just start at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about you, your career background and story, and how you got interested in urban design.
So my name is Jason Roberts. I'm based in Dallas, Texas. My background actually was an IT planner, I guess IT consultant, but also help kind of plan the networks and build computers out and servers out. I worked for IBM for a bit. And on the side, I like to travel a little bit. And early on, I was pretty enamored by these smaller old world cities like New Orleans, Louisiana, and which was, if anyone's been, it's so different than, Dallas, where I'm from, which is maybe a newer city. It's in New Orleans. I mean, in the scheme of things, it's relatively young, but in the U.S., it's old, right? It's 300 years old. But I wasn't used to like these places that had cobblestone streets and these gas lamps and these little small buildings with like, that faced all front of the street in a cozy way with these piazzas or plazas and courtyards. And and I kind of fascinated by those places and traveled a little bit overseas too. It's actually my father, who's a big reader, who just kind of happened to mention, it sounds like that you're into urban planning. And I didn't know what that was. And he gave me a book that I ended up reading that was by kind of a well-known urban planning guy, and was fascinated by it. And then that led to really me moved to a small, older neighborhood in Dallas called Oak Cliff, and started trying to figure out ways to get involved. This was at a time in the, late 90s, the early aughts, when some young families were moving back to downtowns and inner city neighborhoods, and was trying to figure out, how can I get involved and just do more civic participation? So that was kind of my early entree into this.
Yeah, and so you moved to Oak Cliff, right? In 2006, you started the Oak Cliff Transit Authority. This was kind of your first project, for lack of a better term, really first major initiative that you focused on when it comes to urban design and focusing on improving cities. Walk us through a little bit about what motivated you to form the Transit Authority and kind of your work and what you did there.
Yeah, so probably my early 30s, I just had a couple of young kids, and I would just go to the local library and find old photos of my town and my city, and saw a lot of the old streetcars and started studying these old streetcar maps. At the time, too, I was involved with a historic theater in our neighborhood called the Texas Theater. And it was fascinating because the Texas Theater had 650 seats, but only had 35 parking spaces. So I was trying to figure, well, how would that work? Well, it worked because of the streetcar system. In most US cities too, that had a population over like say 30,000 or so by like 1910 or 20 would implement a streetcar. It was very common. So that got me into going to community meetings and talking about ways we can get people to move back to our neighborhood and start businesses. And a lot of people had all these random ideas, and I would jokingly say like, they would just say, we want a Chipotle, or let's, get a Whole Foods here. And I had the idea of like, well, why don't we try to bring back the streetcar system? And it was such a far-fetched, outrageous idea at the time, but I built a website and I kind of made up this organization saying I was going to help bring back the streetcar system. And it started gaining traction really quickly, no pun intended. And at that point, I started building momentum, and I had a lot of folks that were in the neighborhood that were also on board with this idea of multimodalism and big city lovers. And we all gathered together and we helped create this little organization that really grew a lot faster than I had ever anticipated. And it was really in our neighborhood, which had been seen as the bad part of town for so long. It was something that they could rally behind that was so out there. It was beyond just this, let's get a Chipotle. It was this next level thing that it built momentum far faster than I ever anticipated.
And that was kind of the beginning of this passion when it comes to reviving communities, really transforming neighborhoods into vibrant, walkable districts that's easy to get around, that people can, navigate to without the car. And that's one thing here in Ohio. I just think like we are so reliant on our cars, and it's like that's my dream one day is to just like not have to drive in my car. I don't need to live in New York City and not drive a car, but I want to live here and just not have to be reliant on the car. So I love that this was a focus, and it sounds like others in your community felt that way too. How did you see that really start to transform the community, or what kind of impact did that have? Just the change in having an extra mode of transportation. What impact did that have in where you were living?
Well, I will say that the largest impact by far was just economic development. So in order to have, what makes up a walkable neighborhood is developing a different scale of your streets, and it is readjusting your buildings so they're no longer set back, right? With like these large, like you're used to in your mind, like a convenience store that has like a parking lot in the front and it's set back. Well, if you go to any old world city, there aren't setbacks. The buildings are built right to the edge of the sidewalk. And I hadn't realized at the time, that was a major component of what actually facilitates walkability, right? And it makes sense when you kind of start breaking it down. You realize, okay, if you built it for cars, then it's going to make it more uncomfortable for people. And so right off the bat, the big thing was all of the designs and the planning that came out of the city for our neighborhood started readjusting the buildings and putting them back to the sidewalk again. And so now if you go along the spine of the streetcar line, we have all of these new buildings that are built in a walkable format. So that, what I would say, is probably the most notable. I mean, it's also, I would say, when I was doing that work 20-ish years ago almost, or 15 years ago when I first started doing the streetcar project, it was tricky to try to get people to understand the value of walkable communities. And, you heard a lot like, well, we drive, this is what we do. It makes, it just seems so far-fetched to try to pitch an idea like this Italian village style of walking, everywhere. It's hot, it's car culture, but it's hot in Seville, Spain, and they still walk. And they actually put shade structures between the buildings because they're so close to the sidewalk, and you can actually linger in those spaces. But I will say now these younger generation are more, they're more worldly. I think they're, at least even online with social media, they can easily connect with people around the world, and they're used to seeing these environments, that are more walkable, and they realize, hey, this is valuable, and why aren't we doing these things? So I will say the two big things is beyond just our building forms changed, but I would just say philosophically, people are more on board. You're seeing younger people drive less. My daughter had no desire to get a driver's license, which was just unfathomable to me. That's what you did. You rushed at age 15 to get your driver's permit, and hopes, that at 16 to get your car, so you had freedom and all. But that was not what she wanted at all. And it just was, and most, I would say a good number of her friends were the same way. And that is, a massive shift in what was happening before.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, I just like going back to the European, lifestyle, just walking everywhere. I mean, the benefits that come with that, health benefits, mental health benefits, there is just a whole umbrella of benefits that it comes with being able to walk and to get around without having to get in a car. And I mean, just safety factor. I mean, how many cars, are responsible for injuries and accidents and stopping up traffic. And I mean, it's just having that option. Like you said, it's not for everybody. There are people who are very much still love their cars and want to be able to get around in them, but just having that option, there's a lot of benefits that comes with it. Do you think that, in your opinion, is that going to be a trend that we see moving forward? Is the leaning more towards these walkability cities, that younger generations are going to prefer this and want this more as they're coming up and designing new cities, redesigning new cities? Is this kind of a common feature that you're seeing from the younger generation as we think about the future of cities and urban development?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think it's a few things. Yes, the trends are, some design patterns are often trends. And so it is actually more on trend to develop that way. But I also think, we understand more the ramifications of maybe things like heat island effect and stuff like that. Whenever you build with these large setbacks, without tree coverages, canopies, and wider swaths of concrete, and what that effect is. Obviously, because of the zoning, the separations that we've developed, that also leads to, more sedentary lifestyles. And we are obviously dealing with the ramifications of type 2 diabetes increases in kids even at this point. And, asthma related issues from the CO2 emissions from cars. So, you're dealing with a lot of things that just, it makes it make sense. So you add all that up with also the kids not really wanting to drive as much. And you do have more of these, I think, obvious walkable nodes developing in communities. And, which I tell people they're often their old streetcar stops. And so they're easy to turn back on again, which was kind of another random byproduct I learned of this work I was doing, focusing on the streetcar. Like, oh, if I went even to where you live in Ohio, more than likely, if you have a little commercial neighborhood node in a neighborhood embedded in there, like it was probably there because it was a streetcar stop. And so, yeah, I've got to present. And then also, I think you've got autonomous vehicles, which I know they haven't really matured to the level that we kept thinking they would be. But I do think we will reach a point where that auto parking feature will kick off. And once that occurs, I mean, that's a game changer, right? Because then the buildings no longer need the parking lots. At that point, you can just get out of your car and say, hey, go find a spot. And it's going to just find an on-street parking spot. And so that's beyond, I know people talking about, drones and that humans can ride, things like that. And that still has never matured. I don't know if that will, I'm sure at some point it'll come to be, but, I think, but it seems like technologies like autonomous parking doesn't seem like that far-fetched, because you already have autonomous taxis and autonomous buses that are working out there. And also I think that the technology already exists, but once that's implemented at scale, to me, that changes the landscape for how you develop your city.
Yeah, it's gonna be really interesting. There's a lot more, when you think about cars and future of them, what we're already seeing, self-driving. It's gonna be interesting to see what that looks like in the future and how that's gonna impact how we're designing cities.
This episode of The Real View is brought to you by the Ohio Association of Community Colleges. Ohio's network of community colleges provides accessible training that accommodates the busy lifestyles of aspiring real estate professionals at half the price of a traditional university. With convenient locations in every part of the state, as well as online options, Ohio's community colleges are your smart choice for pre-licensing education. For more details or to start the journey to a real estate career, visit the education page at ohiorealtors.org and then click on the pre-license course locations.
I want to talk about Better Block, right? That's your founding initiative, really what you've put a lot of your passion into. Talk to us about the Better Block project and your kind of vision and hopes and dreams for that.
Yeah, so Better Block really it was really out of a frustration of trying to promote walkable ideas and realizing that when you go to a community and you say, hey, this area that is cars driving really fast and it has wide streets and it has, it's really hot and you say like, look, I think we should come together and put bike lanes in place and add cafe seating and slow the cars down. And there was this knee-jerk reaction I found because it was such a far-fetched idea of saying that could never happen. We're not Paris. This is, in our case, this is Dallas. It's 100 degrees, even though I'd be trying to say like, well, we can put shade trees out though, and that will actually cool the area. And so they talk of like, this is going to be a traffic nightmare. This is going to be kill business as we know it. And I just wanted a chance to say like, what if we just got together for a weekend and we just assembled it and we gave people a chance to try it, taste, feel, touch it, and live in that space. And then we can have a conversation if we like it, if we don't like it. But let's get rid of all of the worst case scenarioing that's stopping anything from happening. And also it got us out of these like meetings with sticky notes, which I'd go to, and just like PowerPoint visions of spaces, and and they never really ever came to be. And then we'd be deflated, right? And maybe lose some faith in the process. And so building it with the neighborhood, it helped kind of teach my community like, what the value of this was and to experience it. And then also to get real-time data analysis and say like, this didn't kill traffic as we know it. People are actually coming in and out of this space, and they enjoy being here even more. And the businesses are getting more business because it's bringing more people out. They're sitting on the sidewalk because there's shade trees. So it's 100 degrees outside, but now under the shade tree, it's 85, and they're drinking an iced tea. And so the Better Block was just kind of this. It facilitated this opportunity to manifest something that I think I wanted selfishly to be able to experience in the neighborhood because it just wasn't there.
Yeah. And then you had quite a bit of success with it, so much so that similar approaches got adopted from countries outside of the U.S. Is that correct? Talk to us a little bit about how you've seen what you've been able to do at Better Block be implemented outside of the country.
Well, yeah, so we open sourced the idea of the Better Block because I was in the IT world, so I was already, comfortable with the notion and the concept of open source software, and posted a website out and showed this is the tools, this is how we did it, and do your own Better Block. And yeah, it started picking up. Like that first year, it went all around the U.S. and there was the first project I saw outside was actually in, I want to say it's Oceanside, Ocean Bay, somewhere in there in Long Island, New York, and it was, and Billy Joel was involved. And we had another one, pop up in, Houston, and then one was popping up in Baltimore, but then it started spreading around the world, and that's what I had people reaching out to me that were in Iran, and Australia, and so it kind of just showed me there was this pent up demand, and it was also interesting too. It was a great tool to facilitate community engagement too, because we already seen participation drop, and that continues to happen. And the Better Block was an opportunity to get people to come out and participate in the process and to meet your neighbors. And then the fascinating thing on that too is I tell people, most anyone who is involved with the Better Block, shortly after, somebody from that team is going to be run for some local election, and that happens all the time because now they know how the machinations of government work, and they realize their involvement has a direct impact on the built environment. And so that was pretty fascinating to see as well. So anyways, seeing that take off around the world, it was just it was also more fascinating seeing, we were often like breaking rules along the way because there were so many rules that were put in place that were often made based on social concepts that are outdated at this point and probably should have never existed, or based on concepts of people coming in and wanting us, to have more car-centric spaces. And so it allowed us to challenge those rules. But whenever people were doing these projects in Germany, they were like, well, we don't break rules here. They don't do that. But they were like, but we do have a drop in community engagement. This is a chance for us to bring the neighborhood together. So everybody had a different rationale for how and why they were doing a Better Block.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's really cool. And you were able to work with the government quite a lot throughout your time. Talk to us about that relationship and the role that the government's played and what you've been able to do in creating these walkable, vibrant cities and how you've navigated that relationship with the government.
Yeah, well, I will say, now with government, we started off as this unsanctioned kind of just counterculture-ish movement, but it at some point in time, cities said, hey, this tool actually works pretty well to gather a neighborhood together. Like, you're doing everything that we do in these bigger planning charrettes, but you're concentrating it you're getting community engagement at a higher level with more people, and they're picking up hammers. You're getting the real-time data. So we're actually seeing impact, which is, one of the things you want to study on these things. This isn't just an academic exercise or presumptive. And oftentimes the governments would go in and we could take this work and just literally, and we've had this happen after Better Blocks, right after it's finished, like, okay, it worked. People actually liked to just paint that bike lane that they made though. And so it helped facilitate something that the city already wanted, right? They wanted community engagement. They wanted to figure out how they should continue to adapt and address needs for the built environment. Yeah, and I would say relatively low cost compared to, like, you'll be surprised if you look at the cost of these community engagement meetings, what that takes when they bring in these pretty hefty consulting organizations that are, making these very elaborate PowerPoint visuals and managing, again, these forums, that are, I tell people, it's interesting because we create these forums. It's usually like it's in the public school, elementary school, at 6 p.m. and it's an hour and nobody wants to be there. And it's like sticky notes and it's like everyone's airing their grievances. It's not just about like how we should help redesign the street. They're just also like, I'm mad that my neighbor's dog always barks or something like that. And so it was deflating for me as a community member. So I think cities have found it's a great tool to kind of get unstuck.
Yeah, I think so too. And when we think about maybe implementing that in our cities, or if there's anyone listening who, this is sparking an idea in them to really want to do this community change in their local neighborhoods, is there certain elements that you look for when it comes to this Better Block projects? Is there essential, list of qualifications that a project needs to have in order to be successful? Or how do you really define, what might make a good Better Block project?
Well, ideally, we do like to find areas that maybe already have some good bones for implementing walkability. So if you just start in an area that has, like, maybe it was built 1960s or 70s with large 6-lane roads, massive setbacks. That's the scale of that. The needs to fix something like that are so great that it's hard to do in a short term with, a minimal set of resources to reshape those spaces. So I do like to find, I mentioned that old streetcar stops. They're a lot easier. They oftentimes have buildings already built to the sidewalk edge. And sometimes there's gaps in the teeth, as they say, when there's a building missing over time, and so I can kind of help do something that fills in that gap and that space. And then hopefully there's enough of a streetscape that I can adjust as well. So I can, with implementing a bike lane. Bike lanes I love putting in place. I mean, not just because they help facilitate getting people to ride bikes, but they also help change the size and scale of the street. Because oftentimes our streets keep growing over time. And that's where you have these, these issues with people getting hit by cars and cars flying through neighborhoods really quickly. And so you got to get the street right. If that's wrong, everything else is wrong. So yeah, I look for ideally these quasi already walkable scale and form. And that way I can kind of just add a few components to kind of turn it back on again.
Yeah, no, that's really good advice and kind of gives people a good blueprint of what out there to look for. Has there been a favorite project of yours or something that you've done that's really stuck out or has stayed in your memory as one of the coolest best, most fun projects that you've worked on?
Well, I mean, I always say, like, the first one I ever did was the most impactful, the most, like, eye-opening. And I was a young activist at the time, just trying to, like, figure out how to gather a neighborhood together and get them to do fun things. So that always will probably shine for me. But I will say we've done a range of things that are, and we're working on a book right now. It's like 100 lessons learned from 100 better blocks. So we've done so many of them at this point. And it does kind of address some of these things, but I mean, I've got projects in small towns in South Dakota where they brought back the old, ice skating rink that they used to have that was gone. And we got projects where, in the suburbs where they were wide streets and we just took away the 6-lane road, turned it into a 3-lane road and got rid of the other 3-lane road and made that into a massive bike and multi-use path. And, just really fascinating things. And we went to cold neighborhoods, in Duluth, Minnesota, and showing how we can make fire pits and bring hot chocolate trucks out and make it still a cozy space to use. So yeah, so many wonderful, fascinating stories and all, but that first one is going to be hard to top for me.
No, yeah, definitely, definitely. It sounds like really there's no limit to kind of the ideas or what you can dream up in order to better your community. I mean, so if you had a bit of advice, for people interested or thinking about this, who want to create that positive change in the communities, what would your advice be?
Well, I do kind of have these rules that I talk about in my presentation, but it's really this idea of like one of the key things is just to show up and join all these neighborhood meetings, all these groups. I will say levels of participation across the board are down in cities. The fascinating part on that is because so few people do show up. If you do show up, you'll be shocked at the amount of change or possible change you can make in an area because everyone is kind of assuming it's somebody else's job.
Mm.
So that right off the bat, and the other thing that I did was, I created all these little simple, fun, irreverent, playful organizations and groups that I found people were looking for a sense of belonging and a place to gather together. And I was able to facilitate that through these I mean, like I created the streetcar organization, the Oak Cliff Transit Authority, and I created a bicycle group, Bike Friendly Oak Cliff, and I wasn't trying to hit people over the head with this idea of like the education component. I absolutely wanted them to understand what we were doing and want to celebrate walkable environments and multimodalism and all. But I was more like, let's just go have fun as a neighborhood. Let's do a big group bike ride together and talk about the history of the neighborhood. And that was really compelling. I thought that was really neat to see. And so that's what I tell people, those kind of things, simple things like that.
Yeah, well, they always say, there's that like rule of three that you should have your work, your home, and then that third space where you want to spend time. And it sounds like what you've been able to do is help make that third space happen in a healthy, vibrant, great way for the neighborhoods and everyone else that's around. So you've accomplished so much, Jason, and such an inspiration to be able to hear from you. And I can't wait to hear more here in September when we have you at convention. What's next for you? What are your future projects up and coming? What are you really excited about? What does the future look like for Jason and for Better Block?
So it's funny, as an aside from the Better Block, I started working on, we built a restaurant with some friends because we're missing this neighborhood restaurant. And that took off more than we kind of anticipated. So then we were like, well, we should start a jazz bar because we had the restaurant was like a cafe, but a jazz bar. And like, well, we should start a deli. So we made a deli. Like, well, we should start brewing our own beer. So I've somehow stumbled in this world of restaurants that came out of the Better Block. And so I am now up to 5 restaurants. One's in New Orleans. The other 4 are here in Dallas because of my love for New Orleans. And so that has been kind of my new reality right now. And I would say at some point in time, I would love to kind of get involved with small scale mixed use development, kind of returning back the old streetcar scale buildings as well into neighborhoods and into small commercial corridors that already exist within neighborhoods. So that's where I would eventually like to graduate toward.
No, I love that. You could just tell how passionate you are too about all of this. And even after expanding and helping communities grow and doing urban design, you're still giving back to the communities with restaurants and delis and bringing back more of that need to your community. So it sounds like you just have a really great pulse on what communities need, what people need in order to feel good and to thrive. So it's really been wonderful hearing from you, Jason. I can't wait to hear more with your presentation with us here coming up at our convention. So thank you so much for the work that you do in making communities better and for your time here today.
Thanks so much. It's great talking to you.
And to all of our listeners tuning in, make sure to register for convention if you aren't yet registered. It's open now, ohiorealtors.org. We can get you all signed up. Make sure to come see Jason on Tuesday, September 10th. He will be with us in person. You get to hear way more than what we talked about today into Jason's world and what he has to offer. So thank you guys again so much for tuning in, and we'll be back with you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Real View. That wraps up today's episode. You can keep up with the latest on the podcast at ohiorealtors.org/therealview and on Apple or Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Have questions, comments, or suggestions? We want to hear from you. Email us at podcast@ohiorealtors.org. We'll see you next time.